Welcome back to another special episode of When Destiny Calls. Today, we have another speaker, actually two speakers today. Mr. George Kurian is here and Ms. Therese Santana is with us also. They are both going to be presenting at the conference on the 13th, 14th, and 15th. I know I've been talking about it for a while. I know Christy's been talking about it for a while. So this is our last video before the conference. We wanted to introduce our speakers and kind of give you a sense of what they're going to talk about. We've done several of these videos. And so we will be in Salt Lake City, Utah on the 13th, 14th, and 15th. You could find tickets or Zoom tickets on www.instituteforconflict.com. Okay, without further ado, let me introduce everybody. This is George Kurian. George, you want to say hello to everybody?
Hi, everybody.
And this is Teresa Santana. Therese, you want to say hello to everybody?
Yes, hello. Excited to be here.
And this is my co-host, always, Christy Foster. Christy, how are you doing today?
Good morning. It is morning here in this part of the world. Doing great today. Sunshine's coming in. I see on you also, Dr. Lahab and Teresa.
Oh, yeah.
It's nighttime for you, isn't it, George?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's after 6.
Thank you both for being here with us today.
Georgie, why don't we start with you? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? You're in Oslo, Norway right now. You were in Beirut. You were living in Beirut for a while. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I'm based in Oslo now. I've been here for about 2 years. I used to live in Beirut, Lebanon, working as a freelance journalist and a filmmaker, covering the Middle East and all the conflicts there for a while. And I've been working on a film that's looking at, say, the rise of the extreme right wing globally, and asking a question that veers away from the politics of it to ask, why is it that people get the way they do? You know, why do people espouse these ideologies? And that's the film I'm working on now. So I'm traveling in Germany, Sweden, and a few places where we see a rise in extreme right-wing activism. In Sweden now, the extreme right-wing has become a significant part of the government because they got their biggest ever electoral result at 20%. So they are going to be part of every decision that's made in Sweden for the next 4 years.
Now, if I recall my history, Sweden was invaded by Germany during World War II. Were they not? Were they not occupied by Germany?
Sweden was neutral.
They did not. They were not occupied by Germany. Didn't Germany have?
Sweden was stayed neutral in the Second World War.
Well, Norway was neutral. The Germans invaded that too.
Yeah, Norway was invaded. Yeah.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Georgie. You're a filmmaker. You're a freelancer. What else? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I've been working for years in countries like Afghanistan, Egypt, and traveling all over Syria, Yemen, Libya, and looking at conflicts up close and personal, you know, working with various international channels, covering it for the news and as a photojournalist, but also through my documentary work, staying longer with people who, you know, who are entitled citizens one day, paying taxes and feeling safe, and the next day they were refugees, and looking into what happens to a human being psychologically when you go from being, you know, entitled one day, feeling that you know where it's at, and then on another day you don't even have a language to express yourself in, and you depend on the charity of another country, as it were, for every bit of your sustenance till you can actually integrate, which in itself is a very, very hard, long process.
Okay. Teresa, Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, lots to tell. Like everybody, their story.
Well, you're
So
a
I would say
doctor, so it's Dr.
doctor.
Santana. I apologize for not
It's
introducing you
okay.
that way.
No. I do hold the title of doctor in naturopathic medicine,
Mhm.
primary care. I also have a strong focus in behavioral health. So I'm trying to merge those two instead of them being, separate how they are in the US health system. I also am working on my dissertation for a PhD in psychology. That comes from a long and deep-seated need and want to study human thought and behavior, and those deep-seated questions. Why do we do what we do? Why do we think the way we think? How do we think about things? So those are, the questions that it's obviously going to be lifelong for me to answer, and in different settings. Like George was talking about, different refugee communities and populations. I do have some experience actually in the work that I do here in Seattle with different entities like King County. So I recently was working with the Afghan population and the population of refugees that came over. This was last year around this time. And so I'm deeply invested in, learning their situation and how they feel about things. And obviously that comes with, tremendous amounts of trauma and how they're able to integrate into a whole new society and way of living. And like you said, they don't, sometimes have their the things that they've had their whole life, language, culture, surroundings. And so it's really important, or it was important for me, especially when I was in that community working with them, to get it across that, this wasn't their choice to come here in that particular situation. It's not something that they foresaw, one day, and then it was literally overnight that that government fell, that country fell the way it did. So yeah, I like what you said, George, and your work definitely is so impactful. So what I'll be talking about in Utah is, my own journey through overcoming and dealing with my trauma and healing. I think for a long time, I just pushed it down. And like a lot of people, so in the work that I do and the people that I see, trauma comes up for them in different ways that they might not even know that that's the trauma talking. That's the deep-seated, shadow work that they need to do. So I love to see that aha moment in people and in myself, actually. So that time when they realized I can show up the way I want to in the world. I can choose how I want to respond, instead of, for me, a lot of the childhood trauma would just take over, and I didn't know what it was, so I would dissociate. And for a long time, I could recognize that I was dissociating, but I didn't know how to reintegrate, those aspects of myself. And so that's what I'll be talking about.
So, Christy, do you have some questions for our presenters?
Well, I'm very excited to have both of you. You bring such a rich depth around trauma and conflict to us that I think many people might not have been exposed to. We hear about it. I don't know people personally except the two of you, and maybe just a handful that actually are experiencing and working with people that have been displaced.
Yeah.
And I think the more that we have education and awareness around it, the better, because then we can support and help them however that needs to be. George, I would like to ask you, what's your experience been since you've done your documentary, which I have seen, and it's excellent. as people become more educated about what's happening across the world, to these refugees and how they're coping, what's been the feedback for you from people?
I mean, there has been such divergent kinds of feedback. I mean, some of it has been just people getting over their own fears. Often when you with refugees, or the last wave of refugees that came from Syria, many countries had this wave of empathy in the beginning, saying, "Oh my gosh, this is terrible." And after that came the fear, and often motivated by forces from the extreme right wing, using Islamophobia or cultural differences, to kind of say "Oh, what have we done now? How are we going to handle this? Are we in danger?" So it's kind of a strange situation where the majority starts perceiving itself to be in danger from one of the most vulnerable sets of people in their midst.
Right.
So it's everything from, "Oh, I'm glad I heard this, because now it makes me kind of see them as human beings." The first time I heard that, it was like a gut punch to me, because what did you think they were before?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I guess it's such a powerful tool that's being used in politics, this whole dehumanizing, right? And it's been done time and time again through history with devastating results. And we see the same thing kind of being activated again in so many countries. The other side, there were so many things that I would not have myself figured out if I hadn't interacted with people who became refugees so closely, like how every little thing, it's not just about when you're in danger, but every little thing, like going to a supermarket in a new culture, is stressful. It's not that you fear for your life, or it's not that you have you have money in your pocket, but every moment is stressful because you have no idea how you're being perceived and what is happening. And these were things that, normally we think people need safety, people need food, shelter, and once that's done, then people can find their own way. But it takes years where you can find yourself in another culture. I mean, people say it takes about 7 years for you to have a good grasp of a foreign language, right? And we're just talking language. Then you can kind of become comfortable, not just learning a language, the grammar, but to be conversant in it and feel comfortable that you get all parts of that conversation. And then here is not just a language, it's all parts of you, how people are perceiving you, how people are, what's happening with your kids, your family, and all of it. And I think this is such an, the media doesn't talk about it, because often you see that, we have facts, numbers, but the psychology of it is completely left out of, of the news. Yet it's one of the most important things in this whole thing.
Well, it most definitely would be. And you see that in probably most everyone you've interviewed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And Teresa, I assuming your experience is similar working with the population that you had.
Very, very similar. And almost to the T, everything he said, I have witnessed firsthand. So it was just amazing to see the resilience of the refugees. As a whole, I can say every single person, and I've when I was working with them, I saw hundreds, probably more than 300 come through the housing program that we had for them. And you're right, George. I personally had to show them how to use the bus system. How does a debit card work here? How to get around and figure out, okay, you go here for this type of food, or you go here for this type of meat, a halal meat, and different items that they might have had a wealth of in their country, but here it's so scarce. And so beyond just, shelter, which that's what we were trying to provide for them in the moment, basic needs, it was so much more, you know, and of course the behavioral part, the behavioral health, mental health part of it, I
Yeah.
would sit in their rooms with them.
Yeah.
And despite this being COVID, I actually didn't even come to my mind, because I wanted to sit with them. And, you know, I had an interpreter on the phone. And of course, they have different dialects depending on where they came from in Afghanistan. So we had to first know exactly what language they speak and prefer. And then the cultural part of it, you know, there were some rooms, obviously, you know, I couldn't go in, being a woman. So respecting those, caring for, like you said, the families. So it wasn't just single people sometimes we had, you know, families with 9 children. So think about, you know, they came here with just the clothes on their back, and they had video of them escaping, you know, into the airport, onto the flight line. So they showed me this, you know, and obviously, you know, I was in tears. And, you know, one of them said to me, you know, don't cry for my country, because we will overcome this and we will be strong again. And that, you know, gave me hope. And so just listening to those stories, I mean, so impactful. I'll take it for the rest of my life, you know, to be there as they're coming, you know, off the plane and coming straight to our location here in Seattle. And so yeah, and what I got from it was that, you know, yes, the county's providing, you know, food and housing, but that's not enough. And it wasn't, you know, it wasn't nearly enough of what they needed to be able to be here, to exist here. It didn't even meet, you know, there was no infrastructure to help them beyond the immediate. And I just thought, you know, that was a big failure on our part, because how can you not think of, you know, what they need? You know, I would be there sometimes 18 hours. And so people would actually have nightmares in their rooms, and they were, you know, scared. Am I safe here? You know, what is this place? You know, just basic, simple things. And there was absolutely no type of infrastructure, no thought of, hey, maybe we need to bring people in, you know, that are trained in trauma and help them through this, because there wasn't any. Like, I was it, you know, and they brought me from another site to there. And I'm so grateful they did, because I was able to be there for them, you know, and I was able to listen and to be there for them. And like I said, just hearing their stories, looking at them, making sure that I heard what they said, and then teaching other people how to interact with people who are non-English speaking, you know, looking straight at them and not talking to the phone to the interpreter, things like that, you know, that can make such a difference and build rapport, because we didn't know how long they would be here, how long I would be in that position. So, you know, that human element, hugging them, holding their hands, crying with them, there's no way, you know, words can't even really describe that feeling, and that presence that I was able to have with them. So yeah, so very, you know, very thankful and honored. But yeah, just their experience is something that, you know, we can't even capture, I think, with words.
Yeah.
So Georgie, you were telling me that you were on you were in the water with them recently? You were on a ship?
Oh, that was a different journey. I mean, you know, I'm working with this young man who came as a refugee, you know, across the Mediterranean as a refugee, and went through all the hardships of getting into school. And then he's decided to learn to be a sea captain.
Oh,
You
oh,
know,
wow.
yeah. So of course, I mean, the moment I heard it, I thought, wow, this is somebody taking the bull by the horns, grappling with
Absolutely.
straight out.
That's
You know,
not easy.
yeah, but though when I asked him, he said, yeah, you know, I know you think that, but I don't have a straight answer to that. I can't really say that's why I did it. So, but that was interesting in itself, to make like a clear choice of what you're going to do, because other people who came with him on his boat, on the same boat as a refugee, they said, I get nausea every time I even see the ocean. I can't even go to a beach.
Right.
The sound of the wave
Right. Yeah.
nauseates them, that
Yeah.
kind of clenching fear of,
Mhm.
which you didn't know, will I live, will I not? And he's gone completely the other way. And like Teresa was saying, people come into these places, and Mustafa had the same thing. Once he was safe is when his PTSD kicked off. Full-blown nightmares and PTSD and all of that. And all while he's in one of the toughest courses there is, in one of the most sought after technical universities, learning to be a sea captain.
Yeah.
So he went through all these ups and downs, and last month was when he had an internship on a huge 18,000 ton, 180 meter boat.
Wow.
That goes that's out in the open sea. And
Amazing.
luckily I got permission to be out there with him. So I spent a week, out there, filming him as he goes through. So he has to do everything from chipping rust on the decks to being on the bridge, steering the boat as it comes into port. So, so that's him now. But yeah, it's been an incredible journey, from having to deal with all those demons that came out.
Yeah.
To
I bet.
him going into therapy and them telling him, the best you can do is befriend your demons. And I think when I met him now, he said that was a big revelation for him, that you don't have to kind of, there is no getting them out of the system. There's only befriending them and learning to live with them. And it's made a huge difference, because I can see that, I've spent so much time with him over the years. We've been, sometimes sleeping in the same room in, cramped quarters. So just the way he sleeps has changed over time. So it's been wonderful to see that, there is resolution to be had. It's slow, it's hard, and it's never happily ever after, but there is resolution. So that was my recent boat journey.
It's fascinating. It's fascinating how these things change, right?
Yeah.
1 minute you're a refugee on a boat, now you're a boat captain. It's fascinating how life moves on so quickly and transforms, and how you transform. And the issue always comes up to, how do we deal with the trauma? How do we face the trauma? How do we work through the trauma? Because the trauma is always going to be the major obstacle in the way of moving forward. It's the one thing that keeps screaming at you. It's the part that keeps you frozen.
Yes.
And I have to, going with what Teresa said, one of the things that have shocked me is how little there is by way of infrastructure to deal with it, especially with refugees.
Yeah.
Like this lad, when he realized that his nightmares were coming from, PTSD, he went to a psychologist. They had no idea. They put him on meds, and everything just went from bad to worse. So for about 3 years, he was doing nothing. He just living with the idea that, been there, they can't help me. Till he had to kind of look at the fact that I can't do anything with my academics right now if I don't have a breakthrough. And luckily, somebody pointed him in the direction of a trauma, somebody who's worked with people who've escaped war and trauma. They were the ones who were finally able to help him. And this, I've seen this in every refugee camp in Europe that I've been to as well, that it's the psychological element of taking care of people is so, how do you say, overlooked?
Yeah, it is overlooked.
Yeah. And some people would say, well, they're going to stay in this temporary housing forever. They don't want to take it upon themselves. And when I talk to people, it's the psychological portion of it. Like you said, why would I leave this place, even though it's temporary? I mean, we had them in a hotel, that we contracted out. And it's like people are not thinking of that portion of it, whereas the person is like, why would I leave this place if it's safe right now, even though it's, you know, no infrastructure, I don't have my own things here. However, I don't know what's out there. You know, it's
Yeah.
that fear of the unknown, you know, that fear of, can I make it out there on my own? And of course that makes sense if you're in a whole other country, a whole other society. Language, you know, language is just one of the barriers. There's so much more. And so, yeah, the psychological portion of it is nowhere to be found. Help is nowhere to be found, like in the refugee camps. And then even if they get to a secondary site. So yeah.
Landing in a place that you're going to end up living in that you've never been in, or you have only seen in movies. Two different experiences, like landing on a different planet.
Right.
Because
Oh yeah.
the smells, the noises, the sounds, the conversations, and the faster you acclimate to that, the easier it is to integrate into. But still, the problem remains is that you have to integrate. The place around you doesn't integrate you. You have to integrate. You are the one. So not only are you coming from the outside and looking in, but the people who are in are looking outside and seeing you and not including you. So that becomes complicated, as how do I get through that? How do I work through that?
And often judging you, you know, there's a lot of judgment there as well, you know, which is perceived.
And also they were ripped from their situation, their country in some situations, you know. So yes, they have to integrate, but they're still being pulled because they were ripped from their country and their way of life. So that's another portion, and I think people get stuck within that.
Well, it's your home,
area.
It's your neighbors, it's the people you break bread with, it's the people you sit in the cafe and have tea or coffee with, it's the people you party with, it's the people you play with, it's everything about, and that gets destroyed when it gets destroyed. There's a guilt about leaving it behind. It's like you are fleeing and you should stay and fight or rebuild or do something because it feels like you're helpless and hopeless. You're saying, Georgie, you had a thought.
I mean, you know, we've had migration forever, right? This is not a new phenomenon. You know, we've had it for thousands of years. And this is actually, but it's also one of the scariest things for people, for human beings to deal with. You know, as the moment we start seeing ourselves as one kind of a whole, as a tribe, as a society, as a country, in comes someone else or something else that kind of makes us have to start thinking again. So even though this is a constant, what surprises me is how little equipped we are to deal with it. You know, almost every generation there's people coming in, people going out. That's one side of it. And the other side of it is that, you know, when we talk about integration, we almost always talk about the outsiders who come in having to integrate with us, right? But which culture in the world can claim to be stable over, you know, we change all the time. But there's this organic change that happens that we don't question. We just go with it. But the kind of change we immediately suspect or question is when there's somebody with a different kind of costume living next door, you know, or different color. It almost seems instinctive to kind of think in terms of us and them, you know. So I tend to think of integration in the largest sense now, because I think we all have to integrate, you know, all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
Every new
like relationships.
Absolutely, you know, every neighborhood you've moved into, even within the same city, needs you to change somewhere in some shape or form, and you kind of do it organically without thinking about it.
Right. Or within our own cultures, our own ethnicities.
Exactly.
There's still, there's always like something that's known among us that's different about different one of us, and that we notice right off the bat when we see another person from our culture.
And here's a sobering fact, right? With climate change, we're just seeing what's happening in Florida and many parts of the world. The World Bank, which is such a conservative organization when it talks about issues like this, says we can expect as much as 200 million people who become refugees by 2050.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And 1 million people recently upended all our politics and created such a climate of fear across the world, right? 1 million Syrian refugees scattered across the world, and suddenly there's Islamophobes in power. There's all kinds of rhetoric going on. That's what we are not remotely in a place to deal with. The kind of migration we're talking about. What is coming?
Right.
No, we're not.
Yeah,
we're not.
No, because that mass migration is going to occur within countries. Like in the United States, we know that's going to happen. We know there are certain areas that will not be habitable and other areas that will be overcome with new populations moving in very quickly and taxing the resources. We know that's happening in the Middle East. We know they're running out of water. We know that's going to cause all kinds of wars and upheaval if there isn't enough wars and upheaval there. We know that's happening in the Indian subcontinent. We know that's happening in Southeast Asia. We know that it's happening all the way in Australia. We know they burned for an entire summer. They were on fire that could be seen from space. That's how big that fire was. We know it by the fires that we have in the Northwest. We know what is. It's happening every day. Incrementally, is changing the way we live. Is changing the way we see where you can go, where you could live, and how you could live. Florida used to be a great place to have a winter home in. Most Chicagoans would have a home in Florida or Arizona. Arizona's running out of water.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Right.
So these places that used to be safe havens for people, people who were aging or people who were transitioning from colder climates to warmer climates, it's not going to be that easy as much. Those situations are not going to be as easy, and you're going to have to find environments that are going to be suitable or that will house you at this point. So, so with that, so Georgie, you're going to be presenting. We were hoping to have you here physically. It sounds like you don't have visa yet. So you're going to be presenting on Zoom unless something miraculous happens and we're able to.
If I get a call on Monday?
Yeah. You never know. You never know. You never know. So you're gonna be on Zoom and you're gonna I'm gonna have somebody talk to you. I will have that person be in touch soon so you can coordinate. Teresa, you're coming. You're going to speak in person at the conference. So except for George in Norway, I think everybody else is going to be physically present. All our speakers are going to be at the conference. And we look forward to seeing all of you at the conference in Salt Lake City, Utah, at the Salt Lake Community College Conference Center, Miller's campus. You could get all the details on www.instituteforconflict.com. It's Institute for Conflict is one word, www.instituteforconflict.com. And we wanted to thank George Kurian and Dr. Therese Santana for talking to us today and presenting yourselves. Thank you for disturbing your Saturday. We appreciate it.
Not at all.
Um,
This is a
both
wonderful
of you are
conversation.
very busy. So,
No trouble.
Christy, do you have
One
any other
other-
thoughts?
Yeah, just a reminder for people, we also have a Zoom registration link. If you're not able to obviously fly to Salt Lake City, that you can watch the recordings on Zoom. So those will be available as well. So you have two
Yeah.
choices. And Teresa and George, I'm so grateful you're on the planet. We need more people like you that
Mhm.
care from your hearts, not just talking about it in our heads. Thank you so much for the work that you do for
Thank you
everyone.
for having me. It was
Yeah.
great.
Oh,
talking.
it's a
Thank you.
pleasure to have you. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Uh,
Great to